welcome to the show. This is the episode for Tuesday, January the 12th. I'm recording this late on Monday, January the 11th, and lots has happened today. But I have a couple really cool subjects to talk about. The first subject that I want to talk about is called, what is this fraud that they speak of? I know that you've been hearing a lot from Republicans about fraud in the election and their need to hold up the certification and the acceptance of the certification so that they can verify the votes and to do an audit or check on all of these things. Now, I want you to understand some things that are not said, which is why I do the show, but what it really means is about what it is that they're asking for. Now, in terms of vote by mail, I'm going to start there because that's the easiest one to explain. In vote by mail in almost every state, I can't speak for every single one of them, but most states, when you get a vote by mail ballot at your home, you fill it out, and at the end, you stick it in an envelope and you sign the back of the envelope once it is sealed. That signature is the verification that you are the voter and you are who you say you are. And so your signature has to match the signature that is in the system of the supervisor of elections for your county or, whatever municipality you're voting in. Now, here's some important things about that. Sometimes your signatures don't match because you've aged and your handwriting has changed. Sometimes they don't match just because you've got chicken scratch and people can't make out what you're saying, what you're writing. Sometimes they don't match because when you signed for your driver's license, you were signing on an electronic pad and it looks differently than it does if you use a regular pen on paper. Sometimes that's the reason. Sometimes it's because your name has changed or you just changed your signature. Maybe at first you signed it Pamela and then all of a sudden you decide to sign it PM and you forgot that you've made that change. Those are the reasons why the signature might not match, but of course it could also not match if your signature's not who you say you are. That's the whole point. But what's important about that is that when the ballot comes back to the supervisor of elections, they look at the signature on the back of the envelope and they compare it to the signature in the system. And it is the exclusive purview of the staff of the supervisor of election to make that comparison and determine if the signatures match. That is their exclusive purview. And by the way, and this is important, they're trained to do that kind of matching. They have software and all this other stuff, and they do this matching. They are trained to do that, and it is their exclusive authority and right to do so. Now, that matching process can be observed by people who represent Democrats, people who represent Republicans, or people who are just totally independent. League of Women Voters might observe that process, but they observe it from a distance, not so that they can supplant their judgment about whether the signatures match for the judgment of the SOE staff. They're just there to make sure you're doing the comparison, right? So you're there to verify that the procedure is occurring, not that it's occurring to your satisfaction. That is a very important distinction. It came up as an issue right here in St. Lucie County. It has come up in a lot of other jurisdictions, but you can imagine the complete shit show it would be if a whole bunch of people could say, well, I think it matches. I don't think it matches. It does match. It would be a complete shit show. Complete shit show. So no jurisdiction gives any partisan that kind of authority. None. Zero. Not that they don't want it, but they don't, right? It is exclusively in the purview of the supervisor of election staff, and the supervisor of election staff ostensibly is nonpartisan. They're there to do a job, and they do their job, and they take it seriously. So they match the signatures. Once they match the signatures, they open the envelope, and they take the ballot out, and they put the ballot in the box of ballots to be counted. At that moment, that ballot is no longer connected to your name. The minute the ballot is taken out of the envelope and put into the stack of ballots to be counted, it is now commingled with all of the other ballots to be counted, and there's no way of backing it out and tracking it to you. And there's a very specific reason for that, because you're not supposed to be able to track a ballot to a person because that kills the anonymity of the vote. So some states have gone so far as to say, well, we can track whether that ballot was voted as Democrat or Republican or Independent or something like that. Some states have gone that far. But that's pretty much all it's got. Like, you could not go into a box of ballots and pull out Pam Keith's ballot. That's exactly what our system is designed to prohibit. Because it would make it too easy for people to say, I'm pulling out Pam Keith, and I'm pulling out Laquan Jones, and I'm pulling out Mari Saleh, and I'm pulling out all these people, right? It would become way too easy to do that. So they don't do that. They commingle all those ballots. Important thing to know. So once those ballots are out of the envelopes, there's no way to put them back in the envelopes. Zero way. None. Right? There is no way to back that out. So when the ballots got counted and it was clear that Joe Biden won, what the Republicans demanded was an audit of the signatures. Como? How are you going to do that? They were already verified before the envelope was opened. Before the envelope was opened. Once the envelope is opened and the ballot is taken out and put in the count box, that's all she wrote. There is no mechanism to go back and re-verify that ballot to that envelope, or to just verify that envelope to the signature, because you rip up the signature when you open the envelope. Remember, you sign across the seal. So once you rip that, the signature's done. There's no way to back out that audit. There's no way to audit that. There's none. And so this is why I'm so offended by the stupid petrics of the GOP with respect to auditing the signatures. Because from the inception, it was impossible. Could not be done. So they were insisting on some kind of procedure that was absolutely impossible to do altogether in order to verify for themselves that the signatures were properly compared. Now again, they only wanted to do this in districts that had large percentages of minority voters, black voters in particular, and in states that were swing states. They didn't want to do it anywhere else. So again, this is a bad faith argument here. It only matters to them to the extent that they can somehow extract the outcome they wanted. It's not about protecting the integrity of the vote at all. And they were demanding a procedure that was impossible to do. That's why every single court was like, the hell are you talking about? It's not possible. A second thing that I will mention is that they wanted to throw out or hold in abeyance the counting of ballots from large urban areas, with no actual accusation that any particular ballot or group of ballots or counties or whatever were fraudulent, right? And what I mean by fraudulent is a person voted who should not have voted, a person who voted who was not registered, a person voted who was not eligible, a person who voted was not 18, whatever. Now, to the extent that they made these accusations, and they didn't in most states, for example, in Georgia, they made, oh, you had 6,000 people that had moved out of the state, right? The Secretary of State of Georgia went through each and every one of these allegations and said, no, that's wrong. No, these are just duplicate, two people with the same name. That can happen in a big ass state, right? Like things like that. He went through them one by one, seriatim one by one, and blew them out the water. Again, why it didn't work? It didn't work because it was bullshit, right? So that's another allegation of fraud. But I want to dig a little bit deeper as to why each and every one of their allegations of widespread voter fraud failed. And that is because so much of the belief of the right is that people of color shouldn't be voting, period. That it is fraudulent for black people and brown people to vote, which is why they have absolutely no compunction with encumbering the votes of black people, suppressing the votes of black people, gerrymandering the votes of black people. Have no problems with any of that because they don't believe that black people are real Americans. Period. And so they believe that to their DNA, down to their mitochondria, right? And then they go to a court of law and try to prove that blackness is illegitimate or being brown skinned makes you an illegitimate voter. And so they have all this passion and the zeal, but they have no case. Under what law in the United States of America is brownness illegal or illegitimate? So they just say all of the votes of Wayne County must be illegitimate. Because in their hearts and their minds they are, but because the voters are black and brown and urban, right? Like somehow urbanness makes you incapable of making good decisions. Quite frankly, I think that's the opposite of that is true, but whatever. Right? They think there's some sort of urban hive mind that somehow delegitimizes the choice of people who live the choices of people who live in cities, and that the only real people are people who live in rural counties. What? 'Tis total nonsense, my friend. So that is why they failed so miserably. They failed miserably because they were seeking audit procedures that are impossible as a matter of fact, and because they could never get to the heart of what they considered to be fraudulent. And anytime they tried to specifically assert a group of votes as being fraudulent, they were wrong. Just wrong. So delaying the certification of the election longer would have made no sense. It was a game. Asking the Supreme Court to step in made no sense. It was a game. It was BS from start to finish. That's why the court dismissed it summarily, and that's why they were over every case they filed. This fraud of which they speak is the fraud of people who aren't like them voting. The problem is, that ain't fraud. That's liberty, boo-boo. Get used to it.
If you like what you just heard, you can find out so much more and hear so much more on my Patreon channel, patreon.com/PamKeithFL. That's where you hear the rest of this discussion, and there's lots more to share.